Hi, and welcome to chapter 14. This will be the last chapter that we're going to do of this book. There is one more chapter on Java FX, but we're not going to be doing that in this class. That doesn't mean that when you're done with this class and you've got a week for spring break, you shouldn't go look at it. It's really fascinating. We just don't have time to get into it. So let's get started in our swing components. To understand how swing is done, we need to understand parts of how it was created. When we first started doing windowing toolkits in Java, we used a concept called Abstract Windowing Toolkit, or AWT. That was the old version. It used a frame and some buttons. And then we decided with Java, we wanted to come out with a new concept called swing. We compared it to swing dancing because it was so cool. And we changed those frames and buttons to JFrames or JButtons. So we put a J in front of them, and they were Java specific rather than just frames and buttons that could be used by any Windows application. Those components are called controls or widgets. We like to use the word widget a lot. So the controls that we're going to be using are the components like the frames or the buttons that we're going to be playing with. The thing to understand with the algorithms you're going to be writing to make these swing components is that there are containers that hold other components. So a window holds containers, and a frame is a window that has just a border and a title bar, and it can contain other items inside of it. So you're going to see as we move along working with the JFrame how we can build our components and put them into an interface that makes it very easy for the user to use. It'll start to look a little familiar as we move along using the different components. But you need to think of it simply as we have our different controls or widgets that we put inside of containers, and those containers hold them, give them a formatting or a layout. Okay? Okay, so the JFrame is just a class like all of the other classes that we've been using. They have constructors. We can either take a title that's going to go up in the title of your frame, or we can just give it with open closed arguments and it won't have any title at all. And you can create your new frame, and you want to give it a size, and you want to set its visibility. So when we set our size of our JFrame, we give it a width and a height, and that will tell us how big it wants to be in your screen. Remember, smaller screens, maybe 600 by 800 or so. If you're looking at them lengthwise, the length would be the 800 and the height would be 600. For smaller or older screens, older monitors, they can go up to, 1040, 480, or a 1480, 1920. Your screen will be different than mine. So a lot of times when we make applications, you want to kind of design them for the smallest possible frame so that everything looks nice. It'll look fine in the bigger frames, depending on your screen size. So start with a smaller size, play around with it. You can increase it as you go along and play around. A couple of close methods that we want to set default. We want to default exit on close, we want to dispose on close, we want to do nothing on close, or we want to hide it on close, which is the default. So when you get to the close, what do you want it to do? Most people will actually want it to exit the application entirely on close, but it'll depend. Essentially, the question is, what do you want it to do when you close the frame? Remember, these frames have the little button at the top with a little X that allows you to close it. What do you want the application to do? And this is different than the rest of the events we're going to be playing with. So the close options, play around with the 4 of them and see which one you like best and how you like to use them. I've also included here a couple of the methods that you can do with a JFrame. And you'll want to read through there and play around a little bit and see what the different methods do. Okay, now we're going to start talking about our layout manager and our JLabel. So sometimes people think that a box that has text in it is called a text box. Sort of. A box that has input can be a text box. If you want to just write text on your screen in a window, you want to call a label. A label does not have a border around it by default, and it doesn't have the ability to edit it, which is very important. So your label is an uneditable component. Usually titles at the top provide information, maybe label a text box that the user will be entering information into. The constructors for JLabel are listed here, but we can give it a text. What kind of text do we want to put in it? What alignment? Do we want to have an image? That kind of thing. We can add in here in our constructor for our JLabel. Now remember, just like any other class that you've created, there's probably some setters and getters in there as well. You should really feel comfortable using those. If you make your JLabel, you can change those as well. You can change your fonts. So your MyLabel set font, because we have a font. And a font is another type of object. So we have an object called a font, and it takes a constructor that's listed here. And so you're thinking of these little objects or these components or widgets of your Swing components that are just classes like we've been using the whole time. They've got setters, they've got getters, they've got constructors. This should feel really familiar. Okay, the other thing we want to talk about is our Layout Manager. Our Layout Manager allows you to add multiple components, and the Layout Manager that we're going to use first is going to be a flow layout. This one is designed to allow you to add multiple components, and every component will just add to the end as long as it can in a row, and then it'll roll down to the next row. So depending on what your screen size is, it might fit 2 items, might fit 3, might fit 5, and then roll down. Might only fit 1, depending on how big that item is. So you can have your width and height of your label or how much text is in there, and that may change as the user's window size increases or decreases based on their display. So the Layout Manager we're going to play with first is called a flow layout, and it does this nice flow and then rolls down to the next side like word wrapping. Okay, we're going to talk about some ways to extend that JFrame class. If you want to create a default JFrame to use throughout your work, you can create an extended JFrame class. In this way, you're doing a subclass, just like we did in our inheritance lesson. And you can make your own JFrame that has a default width and height. So you don't have to set the width and height every time. That way you can set things like visible automatically. You can set other pieces of information as you go along and make this your own personal class. It makes it so that every time that you want to make a new JFrame, you don't have to fill all this stuff out. Remember, we made a subclass, and the subclass just has this all set. So you can set your height and width, you can set your visibility, you can set your close behavior, these kind of things, and then you can just use your frame every time you want to create your own frame. The 3 components that we're going to talk about here are pretty common, and you're going to be using these on top of your JLabel in the projects that we're going to be writing. The first is a text field. Again, text field is not uneditable. A text field is editable. This is where you allow your user to enter some pieces of information. So you can have a JText field, and it has the constructors listed, and you can use the getText method of that object to find out what the text is that the user entered. We're going to talk about event-driven in a few minutes. So right now, when the user enters some pieces of information into your text field, you can retrieve that text using the getText method. There is also a component called a button. Buttons, just like they are in HTML, if you've done any HTML programming, allows you to trigger an action. It makes you do something. You can maybe make a selection or trigger an action and have an event fire off to allow something to occur. So constructors are listed here, and then we can, obviously, we use setters and getters as we go along to get pieces of information. The last one we talk about is our tooltips. These help the users to understand your purpose. You know, if you mouse over something and it pops up a little tooltip that says what this button does when you do it, tooltips are great. We can put these on any component, and we're going to walk through different ways to build these. So as you can see here, I can make a JText field called response, make it into a new JText field with a constructor, just like we've been doing all along. Then I can add that JText field to my frame to get it to show up. Let's talk about how we can make things happen. Here we are going to talk about our event-driven programming. Everything in Swing is done by events. Nothing happens without an event being thrown or fired. And there's events all over the place. There's the window opens, the window closes, a button gets clicked, items get typed in, checkboxes get checked or unchecked. All of these events allow you to write programming events to occur when somebody does something. So if you've already started writing your page, you'll notice it doesn't do anything. You can load it, that's great, but it doesn't change, it doesn't make any difference. You can type something in your text box and click the buttons, but it doesn't do anything because we haven't attached any events. Events always consist of a source, which is the component that caused the event. Who triggers or fires the event? Could be a button, it could be a text box, it could be the window itself. So what is the source? The next is the listener, which is the component who cares about the event, who cares that the event occurred. That's going to be a piece of code that you're going to be writing that's going to say, please tell me whenever this button does something, because I'm going to listen. And every time the button gets clicked, I'm going to do something because I'm listening. So if you wanted a label to change color when a button is pressed, the button is the trigger, but the label is the listener. The label is the thing that wants to change. He cares that the button was clicked. So to be a listener, you have to tell the compiler you're a listener. You have to register your class, or you register your component as a listener. To prepare your class to handle events, you have to do a couple of things. First off, you have to be prepared to accept event messages, import and implement event listener interfaces. Remember, we talked about interfaces back in our inheritance classes. So you have to import the AWT event package and implement the action listener to work with your action events. So if I have a button, I need to add an action listener to my button so that my button knows what it's supposed to be listening to, what it's supposed to be doing. You're going to pass the parameter that's going to tell the listener, send any action events like button clicks that come from the A button to my frame, which is this. So the A button is the thing that you click, and this is my frame. That's the one who wants to hear about it. Next, you need to add additional event listeners, which we're going to talk about a little later. In the previous versions of the book, instead of doing Java FX, we went into more in this. I'm still going to go ahead and go into them because I still think they're important to know. Next, you have to write your class designed to respond to the event. So you have to build what we call an event handler. This is a piece of code that handles the event. What do you want me to do? Okay, that was a whole lot of stuff. So we're going to go do some methods from the class, or from the book, and we're going to go write them together. So I'm going to show you which page you're going to go to, and then we're going to jump over to Visual Studio Code, and you're going to watch me go through it. This is the code that you're going to be writing. Now, I'm only going to show you this for a few minutes. It's in the book, and you can go copy it from there. But we're going to go from here over to Visual Studio Code so that you can see it actually being done. All right, so we're going to get started with page number 727. This is the event-driven project from your textbook, JLabel. We're going to go ahead and just type through it and add things as we go along, and then I'll explain as I'm adding things. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and create my new file, JLabel.java. We are going to be creating our own custom frame here. So we are going to be extending JFrame and implementing an action listener. I'm going to go ahead and add my imports at this point because I can. javax.swing .star, because we're going to want all the swing stuff, not bean info, .star. And we're going to import our Java AWT. And we're going to import our Java AWT event. That one's important because we want to get the action listener from the event to be able to play around with that. All right, so let's go ahead and make my class JHelloFrame, and it extends JFrame, and it implements action listener. Remember, action listener is going to be the part that that tells us how to handle events correctly. And our JFrame tells us that we want this to be a frame. So now we know we have to be a frame. Just keep an eye on it. It's a serialized class. It does not declare a static final serial UID, so it's a little bit unhappy. I'm going to go ahead and add that. And I'm going to do the generated one. I'm actually going to just kind of throw it up at the top there and just let it be a data field. It's useful to keep that in just because it keeps things straight for the compiler. You don't really absolutely need it, but I don't like having yellow squiggly lines, so I always do. I'm going to add my label. And remember, this is just like any other data type. I need to have a data type, JLabel, and my variable name question. And it's going to be a new JLabel. And I'm going to add a text in there that says, what is your name? Because I'm going to ask my user what their name is. I'm going to go ahead and set my fonts next. So remember, font is a class type. And this is a big font because we're going to be doing kind of a header with this. And we're going to set that equal to a new font. And we can add a couple of parameters here. So I'm going to add Arial, AL, which is the font name. I'm going to use font.bold. You can see that those are enumerated types, but I can do font.bold. And I'm going to say 16 points. Now, if I did not have the book to tell me that, I could just look at the new font constructor and see what the options are. So the string name was what is the font name itself, Arial, Times New Roman, Calibri, for Dana, whichever font type you want to use. The style are things like bold and italics. You saw those when we looked at the different options there. Italic, bold italic, plain. And then the last is the size, 16 points, and it's a point size. So we want to keep track of that, just like in Microsoft Word where you've got those different point sizes. You want to have those. Okay, I'm going to make up my J text field. Remember, a text field is where my user is going to enter something. So this is going to be their answer, and it's going to be a new J text field. And I am going to tell it that it's going to be the size of 10. Again, remember, I can always mouse over and see what the required parameters are for this constructor. In this case, it takes a column width, how many columns to make it the preferred width. And in this case, I wanted it to be 10. So we're going to go ahead and do 10 for that. And then I'm going to add a button. And the button is going to be attached to an event at some point because we want the button to do something. We're not going to do anything until the button does something. The book uses Press Me. I usually use BTN for buttons, but again, this is going to become your personal preference. What do you like to do? And I'm going to tell my button that is going to say Press Me, and that's what the text is that's going to be on the button itself. Finally, I'm going to have a JLabel that is a greeting. That is a new JLabel, but in this case, it takes an empty string. We're going to be changing this as we go along because when we do this app, it's going to take the person's name and say, hello, Cheryl, whatever your name is. So in the greeting section of my layout manager is where that's going to go. So at this point, I'm going to have something at the top that says, what is your name? I'm going to have a place for them to put their answer in. They're going to have a button, and underneath is going to be a label that is going to get populated when they click that button. All right, so this is an object that we're making. These were all data fields or things that we wanted to put up at the top. They're hanging out there. Let's make our constructor. Public JHelloFrame. It takes no parameters. This is our constructor for our JFrame that we're going to be doing. We're going to be calling super because we want to call that super constructor with our title, HelloFrame. Remember how I told you that JFrames took a text, which is going to be that title up at the top? That's what we're putting in for super. Now we can set all the rest of our stuff. So we can do set size. And in our size, we are going to do our width and our height, which I forgot to enter. Width and height. So let's go in and add those back up here. These were our constants. Our final int width equals 275. And our final int height equals 225. By putting those there, if we decide that this doesn't fit our screen very well, we can always increase them really quick without having to go look for the code. Where does it add my height and width? We're going to set our layout. Layout. And in this case, we're going to use the flow layout I talked about. New flow layout. And it is also a class, so you need to do a constructor, just like we did for a lot of other new things through this class. We're going to set our layout to a new flow layout. Okay. Our question, our JLabel at the top, that's our question. We're going to go ahead and assign its font. So question, we are going to set its font to our big font. Remember, we defined our big font up above. So our question is a JLabel. It has a method called setFont that takes a font. You don't want to type in just Arial at this point because that's just a string. In this case, we've created a font object that we're using, and that's how we're filling that in. The next one we're going to set is our greeting font. Set font, and we are going to set that one to our big font as well because we want those to both be big and large and show off. Okay. Next, we are going to add some things to our frame. Because this is our frame, we can just use the add method to add components to our frame as time goes on. We could say this.add, but in this case, add also works. You can see add, and we have a whole lot of things we can do with add, but in this case, we're just adding a component, and we're going to add our question, which is a component. We are going to add our answer, which is a component. We're going to add our press me, which is our J button. We're going to add our greeting, which is greeting, which is our other component. Okay, so we've added our 4 components. We're going to set our default close operation. Default close operation, and we are going to say JFrame dot exit on close. In this case, you could also put in the integer 3. It knows what that one is. It's an enumerated type, so it knew these are the constants that it uses. And then finally, we are going to add our action listener. So press me dot add action listener. Very important. This is a really important part. And we're going to say this. We want our frame to know when the press me gets pressed. Okay? And we've implemented that action listener, so we've said that we had to have an action listener. So we're going to go do the action performed, which is the important part of the action listener. It's called a method called action performed, and it's the method that gets executed when the user actually clicks the button. So we have to override it. Very important to put in our override, and it is a public void, and it is an action performed, and it takes an action event. Okay, so this is the method in Action Listener that we have to make sure we implement. Remember, with an interface, you have to implement a certain piece of information. In this case, we're going to have our string name equals our answer. Remember, our answer up there was where the user typed their information, and we're going to get the text. Okay, once we've gotten our text, we are going to create our greeting. String greet equals hello, comma, and name, because the person's going to type in their name. Finally, we are going to set the text of our greeting label, set text to our greet. Okay, so when the user pushes the button, I want this action to be performed. It's going to go get whatever information got put into the text and change the greeting on the frame to do this for us. At this point, you're probably looking at me going, yes, Cheryl, but there is no main. I haven't done a main. I can't actually run anything. I can't test it. I feel like a big failure. Oh my gosh, that's right. We have to go make our main. So if you flip your page to 728, we're going to make our main. So we're going to do another file. And this one is going to be called JHelloDemo.java. This one's going to be our main. Public class JHelloDemo, public static void main string args. Oh, come on. There it goes. Args And in here, we're going to be creating our JHello frame from our previous page. And it's a frame, and it's going to be equal to a new JHello frame. Finally, we are going to set the visibility of it. Frame visible. Set visible, excuse me. To true. So when we do that, the frame will actually, we'll create a new version of the frame, and then it will go ahead and make it visible so we can see it. Now I can hit my run. It should yell at me here because it's going to say it doesn't know about this directory. Yep, it is on my class path. This probably has happened to you a lot. I have not added this class path already, so I'm going to go ahead and add it. And it says, cool, you added it. Now I can go ahead and run. When I run, you'll see it runs down here, and put it up in the top corner. It's going to say, what is your name? And a text box and the press me. Okay, just to show you, this is how the flow layout works. As I make it bigger or smaller, it changes the size and it rolls things up or rolls them down, so word wraps. So I can say there, and I can say my name is Cheryl, and I can click press me, and it should say hello Cheryl because it put that greeting there. I can also say Mary, and I can say press me, and it'll say hello Mary. And I can say John, and I can hit press me, and it says hello John. Just to show you how this works, I'm going to come over to my JFrame, and I'm going to throw a breakpoint right here, and I'm going to run this under debug so you can see. We are going to hit debug, and it should still pop that up over there in the corner. Whoops. What is your name? And I'm going to write Cheryl, and I'm going to click press me, and you can see that it's down here in that action performed. My answer in this case is a J text field with all this cool, awesome information related to it. These are all things you can change. Some you can, some you can't. Different pieces of information. My this is a hello frame, which has pieces of information in it as well. I can check any of these. Here's my answer, my different components that are in there. My question will be in here. If I scroll down, here's my height. M, O, P, Q, come on Q. Question, right there. There's my JLabel, because remember we had that too. And I can walk through and you can see right now my greeting text is nothing. See, my text is nothing here. But if I do greeting, let's go ahead and add greeting.text. So you can see that it says nothing right now. But as I move along in my code, I can walk through it, step over, and you can see now I have set the text to hello Cheryl. Okay, and then over here, as soon as I hit play to let it continue, you'll see that it updated it to hello Cheryl. Okay, so this was your first little foray into frames. Remember, we're creating our own personal frame. It extended JFrame. It implemented an action listener. So we were able to get that button to work by overriding our action performed and attaching the action listener on this, which will tell it this method right here, onto the press me button. Okay, hopefully that helped you to get through that project, understanding how it worked. And we're going to go ahead and move on with the rest of the slides. All right, so after doing that project, you should be ready to move on, and you should be starting to think, what other things can I do? Well, first thing we're going to talk about is using multiple event sources. What happens when I have multiple buttons? What happens when I have multiple inputs? How do I handle all of that? So you can add listeners to multiple sources. So you can say, button 1, add listener. Button 2, add listener. Button 3, add listener. And have listeners on all 3 buttons. When you do this, you're going to have one action performed method, but inside of this method, you can check to see which source sent you to the action performed. So you can say, was it button 1 or was it button 2? And handle each button differently. So if I had one button that said change my background to red and one button that said change my background to blue, all I have to do is in my action performed, I ask which source gave me the button event. So there is a E or an event object, action event that came in. Remember we talked about that the public void action performed has a parameter called an action event E. We didn't do it in the last class, in the last project, but in this one we're going to. Our E has a method called getSource, and it returns the component that called the action. Then you can do a comparator to the other actions or the other buttons to say, was it this button? Is it the same as this button or this button or this button? So how you can tell which one's which. You can also use the instance of, and we talked about that a little bit with our classes, with our business loan or our personal loan. You can use instance of to check, is this an instance of a text field? Is it an instance of a J button? What is the class type of our source? And maybe use that to determine how you want to handle that event. So when you have multiple event sources, you can add the action listener, and they both use this because we're writing that action performed method in this class. Okay, so those are our multiple event sources. One of the methods that buttons have on them, or other components as well, is a setEnabled method. And that method allows you to programmatically change the functionality of the component as time goes on. You can do this in an event. When you push a button, it can set it to enabled or disabled, or you can do it at runtime when you create your class. So if I want to have a button that is disabled, I want to have it showing but not actually able to be clicked, I can set the enabled to false, okay, to disable the button if you want it to show on the screen, but you just don't want it available. All right, so we talked about action listeners. These are ones that respond to mouse clicks. You can also have a lot of other listeners. You can have when a text field gains or loses its focus, or a checkbox is checked or unchecked. Text is entered for a key listener. Are you listening for a person typing a key into a text box? So text is entered. There are specific mouse listeners when the mouse moves or when it gets clicked. There's also the window itself. So is the window being opened or closed? Is it being resized? A couple of different things that you can do. So these are examples of listeners. To use these, you must import the Java AWT event library. First off, that's really important. And then either implement a listener or extend a class that already does. So if you use one of the classes that already does and you extend that one, make a subclass of that, then you'll get the listener interface automatically. Otherwise, make sure you implement the listener in your class. Register each instance of event handling for any of the components and write your event handler. Don't forget a couple of things when you do event listeners. That you have your listener, you need to attach to an object, you need to implement the methods to handle it. And you need to make sure that you implemented that interface up at the top in your class declaration. Okay, couple of different listeners. We're not going to get really into them, but I want you to see what the options are. This is one of the more useful ones, which is a JCheckBox. It's a checkbox. It's a little tiny box, and it has a little check X or not X if you want to check it. It's a label with a checkbox. So the JCheckBox will take a label that attaches to it automatically. And it has a couple of different methods. It has an isSelected that returns a Boolean value of whether it's selected or not. So you can check. In this case, the listener for this would be an item listener, and the event would be item state changed. So if the state changed for this item, then run that event. So we have to do add item listener, not action listener, item listener for the checkbox itself. So if we did a checkbox of coffee that you wanted to check on or off, the coffee gets the item listener. And then you have to override the item state changed event, and it takes an item event as a parameter. So for the mouse click that we did before, it was a action event. This one is an item state changed. So if the state has changed. And then you can check some methods in there to figure out, was it checked? Was it not checked? Do I want to say something, a statement that executes when it's checked or unchecked? So this is the checkbox object and how to use it. All right, one of the cool little things that we can do is create a button group. Imagine that you have 3 little checkboxes all right next to each other, but you only want the user to be able to select one at a time. You can handle this in your event class of saying, if one of them is the one that was checked, make sure that the other 2 are unchecked. So go through and change that. But we've added the ability for that to happen automatically by creating a button group. When you add a checkbox to a button group, then everything in that group is already designed to be mutually exclusive. Only one can be checked at a time. So you create your button group, called a button group, say a group, create your checkboxes, A box, B box, C box, then add the box to the group, a group.add, A box, B box, C box, and then add the box to the frame. So the box itself gets added to the frame normally, like it normally would. But if you add it to the group, it now can become mutually exclusive. You don't have to add the group to the frame. That's not important. Having it inside the group so the group knows what those 3 options are will handle it alone. In this case, only one option from the group can be selected at any time because by being in that group, it does the code for you to make it mutually exclusive. One of the more common things that we like to see, especially in menus, is what's called a combo box. It is a button and a drop-down list at the same time. You click the down button, and then you can select an item from the list. It does it automatically for you. You don't have to make a button and make a drop-down list and then handle them both separately. You create a JCombo box, and it's a combination of a button and a drop-down list. To do that, make your JCombo box and then add your options or your items to the box. As we've seen below, we have a JCombo box called Major Choice, and then inside of that, we have added 3 items to the combo box, English, Math, Sociology. Then you add the box to your frame, and it'll make it all pretty and lovely. I've included a couple of methods that go along with JCombo boxes as well. It's a really useful method, like I said, especially in menus, but when you have selections that you want to just do. If we were to go and rewrite our loan options, where we wanted to select either business loan or personal loan, 1, 3, or 5 years, those kind of things could be in a combo box, and it would be a lot easier for your user to have to enter that. Rather than just having a text box that was generic, this would have options in there. By the way, you can use an enumerated list of items at this point. So if I had an enumerated list of major options, I could then do a loop to add each one of those to the major choice checkbox automatically. Make my life a little easier. Okay? All right. This is the project at the end of chapter 14. It is called the JResort Calculator. All of the code is actually in the book, but I'd like you to try it and just play around with it and see if you can make it work. This uses a class. We extend our JFrame and implement our item listener because we have checkboxes. Create your constants, make your checkboxes, create your labels, create your constructor. Don't forget to register your boxes as listeners, and then create your item state changed overridden method to figure out what the options are. Include your nested if or a switch or something to figure out what the prices are. In this case, we have a resort price calculator. Base price for the room is $200. If you want the weekend, it's another $100. If you want breakfast, it's another $20. And if you want golf as well, it's another $75. And then it prints out what is the price of your whole stay. Then you would create a main class with your demo and execute your code. And then you can send it to me and show off how cool you are. So play around with this. Have a little bit of fun with it. The Resort Calculator is a fun project, and it's a good way for you to get a feel for how the GUI works. Okay? So there's a lot of things in Swing that we just do not have time to get to, and it's not in the textbook anymore because they've replaced it with the JavaFX chapter instead. However, I want to give you a couple of things that you can go look up. If you're interested, if you want to continue your knowledge of Swing, these are some things you can go look for. The first is the content pane. We call it the content pane. It's the section of the frame that is just filled with content. So you can think of the frame as a frame on the outside that has the header bar and the minimize and maximize and close buttons. And then there's the stuff on the inside that's the content. There's a method called get content pane so that you can be adding your components just to the content pane itself and not the frame as a whole. So that's one of the things to think of. The other thing is colors. We can change colors throughout. There's a set background, set foreground. Set background would be the background color, whereas the foreground is what the text color is. So if you have words in text, what color do you want the text to be written in? That's your foreground. Another thing we want to talk about is our layout manager. So we've introduced you to the flow layout, but there's a lot of other ways that you can format your layout. You can have it as a border layout. You can have it as a grid layout, a 3x3 grid, and put things in certain cells of that grid. Go look up the different layout options in Java. You can just do a quick Google search and you'll see them. And you can see how the different layouts work. It gives you a lot of different options. There's a class called the JPanel class, which is the class that creates a JPanel, which you can then plop into different parts of your layout manager and fill that one. It's kind of a sub-container that can hold things so that you can have a panel and then you can have a flow layout in the panel, but the panel itself is inside of a grid. Couple of different things. Remember, things can go inside of other things. We can have scroll bars, so we can have a pane that scrolls, so we can have things that offer us scroll bars to be able to scroll up and down. And other events, other event listeners, our key listeners, our mouse events, lots of different things. I just wanted to give you the words so that you kind of knew what to search for if you were interested in learning about them. I would recommend highly the different layout managers because the layout managers really help you design your interfaces a whole lot easier. Okay? All right, end of our Swing chapter. Couple of things to keep in mind. You want to make sure you import the Swing library. It's really important. Your frame has to be set to visible. It defaults to false so that you have to manually set it to true. Remember, if you make your own pane, you can set it to true in your constructor, and then you won't have to do it manually. Your layout, remember setting your layout and the options that go in there. And then your button groups. Remember, a button group is not a JButton group. It's just called button group. They didn't increase that one when they went from AWT into Swing. So, a couple of things to keep an eye on. Let's talk about your homework. All right, because I want you to spend more time on your final than on this, I've only given you one assignment. This is exercise number 6 in the textbook. You are going to be creating an application for a sandwich shop. And in this sandwich shop, they are creating sandwiches. 2 different options that you have to have, which is what is your main ingredient? Meat. Are you going to do roast beef, turkey, ham, pastrami, chicken, vegetarian? Any options that you want for your meats. And then your bread type. Do you want white or wheat or sourdough, rye? Do you want to have a specialty bread? You can add more things than this. This is just kind of a starting off spot for where you want to go with your project. You can add in your toppings if you want to have lettuce, tomatoes, mayo, mustard, onions, pickles, things like this you can add in as toppings. Now, when you check items on and off, or when you select them, you can choose if you want to have only one meat option. So you want to use a checkbox group, a button group, to be able to have only one option done, or if you want to allow multiple options for an extra price or something along those lines. You're going to need to have some event listeners to hold on to things so that you can keep track of all of this. And then you're going to want to display their entire order. You have ordered a turkey on rye with mustard and mayo and pickles, and your total price at the end is $10.25, however it comes out. So your price is going to adjust based on whatever the user has picked. If the user picks different meats or different bread types, if the user picks different toppings, this is going to change the different prices. So you're going to go through, you're going to do your event listeners, you're going to make sure that you have placed your order correctly, and you're going to make sure that it all works. And then that is going to be your only assignment for the swing project. Then you can get started on your midterm. I will probably do another video for the midterm, but just in case I chose not to, this has been wonderful. I hope you guys have enjoyed the class. It's been so much fun for me to be able to lecture to you and to help you guys. And I hope you guys had as much fun as I did. Have a great week.